Hello and greetings, fellow hipsters. Here's another quick checking from me. Um, and today's subject, or the subject of this check-in, is the term loosh. And that's because the other day I was in conversation with someone and I was asked if I could explain what loosh was because it came up in conversation. And um, and so I thought, well, interesting subject, really. And actually, when I looked, when I did a quick search on it, I found that it's coming up quite a lot recently. Um, this term has been around for several decades, and it hasn't really been talked about in those decades until more recently. And I find it's everywhere. There's people talking about it. It comes up on a lot of videos. It's coming up on this video now, but it hasn't entered my um, sphere of conversation, hasn't entered anything that I've been talking about over the last few years. So I thought it might be interesting to bring it up now because actually I first came across it um, in 2007, and I'll tell you how and why. So the term loosh is a term that was coined by a, a guy called Robert Monroe. And Robert Monroe is perhaps one of the most well-known out-of-body experiences, OBEs. And he was one of the first to actually publicly write and talk about out-of-body experiences. He was in the beginning, a regular guy. I think he was an electrical engineer. He worked in radio and radio technologies and communications, and he had an OBE experience, and then he wanted to try to replicate that, to try to learn more. Um, and so he created a technique, a hemispheric beat binaural beat technique called hemisync, syncing the different hemispheres of the brain to help encourage an OBE. Hemisync is now one of the most well-known technologies uh, in binaural beats, and it's been reproduced by many others. And Robert Monroe then set up the Monroe Institute, um, I think somewhere around Virginia in America. You see, I haven't researched this. It's just coming quite, from my own localized memory brain. And it became quite controversial because, in fact, the CIA learned about the OBE training method, and they sent some of their own people there to be trained in OBEs to have their own CIA investigation of the astral world, you could say, or the world outside of the physical body. But let's go back. So Monroe wrote three books, which are the trilogy of his body of work. The first one is Journeys Out of the Body. This is the later edition. Journeys Out of the Body, which was originally published in 1971. The second book in the trilogy is called Far Journeys. And Far Journeys was published in 1985, 14 years later. So Monroe had a lot of time to explore the out-of-body realm, to discuss it in further detail in the second book. And the final book in the trilogy, Ultimate Journey, was published in 1995. Again, another 11 years. So accumulation of material and exploration and each book is rich in exploratory material. Now, I know when I read the books, because I date books when I receive them generally and when I read them. And I know that when I received these books, I read them immediately. But on all these books are dated the same month. So I know I read them that month. And that is, get to the front, March of 2007. So in the month of March 2007, I read this trilogy. I haven't read it since, to be honest. And So I don't have a great memory of the books. In fact, I have been meaning to reread them. It's been on my mind. That's why the books are on my shelf down here, because if not, they'll be still in the boxes elsewhere. So I brought them into my immediate living space with the intention of rereading them, but I haven't. So I read the trilogy once in 2007. So I may be slightly rusty. But the idea of Loosh stayed in my mind way back in 2007. And at that time, again, there was really no talk about it, or there wasn't much talk about it at all until this term is now being talked about more frequently. Now, Loosh, Loosh, it was a term that when Robert Monroe was out of his body, he met a light being, and the light being explained the nature of the universe, this localized universe, and especially the nature of life on this planet Earth. And it was a kind of, the way it was explained to Monroe is that it was like a kind of energy farm, and that there are beings, non-terrestrial beings, who need energy for their food, just like we take in material food. There are these beings that need energy as their food, and they need beings, biological beings, to create that energy food. It's a type of energy harvesting. And the most intense, the richest, most nutrient source of this energy, which they call loosh, comes from heightened desires and negative emotions. So in order to produce the better crop or the better harvest of this energy, they need to promote, encourage negative emotions, and especially the ones who are overseeing this planet in this theory of loosh. They need a continual source of loosh from this planet. Now, that's why the animal kingdom was set up also to create loosh, because the animal kingdom is quite a predatory. I think nature is quite predatory, that, animals feed off, they feed off biological plants, and plants are, have their own state of consciousness and state of energy. They receive from the sun and create their energy. Animals feed off plants. Animals feed off other animals, whether it's insects and smaller animals, or whether it's larger animals and animals of prey and animals of hunting. So you've seen the videos of, life in the safari and in the, and they're in the wild, where animals are they prey, and they are predators on other animals. And that's quite a savage act. And so when that sacrifice or killing goes on, animals release the greater amount of loosh energy. And the same applies with humans. When humans die, that the act of death gives off the energy. If the act of death is a more extreme act of death, such as through murder, sacrifice, suicide, accidental death, or death from whatever, a natural event, human-made events such as a bombing or a terrorist act or war, those deaths create more loosh because there's more negativity, extreme emotion at that point of death. There's also fear, and all that creates a richer type of energy, or loosh energy, for these beings. So naturally, from their point of view, if you want to create a richer food source, you have to enforce it and push it, manipulate it, persuade it into creating more energy. Therefore, there are ways to encourage negative emotions, especially also heightened desires in life on this planet. So in the ancient times, they encouraged ritual killing, religious, sacrificial, sacred killings. Then they would obviously try to create conditions for warfare, suffering, harsh conditions of life. And then later, they would also, in the modern world, they would create normal lifestyle conditions of heightened emotions, which we can see through, our media apparatus, that even heightened emotions of that we think are love can be heightened emotions, love, suffering, films about losing loved ones. Um, and so we are pulled into creating emotions. Of course, and then there's a lot of films about warfare and killing and murder, serial killers, zombies, apocalypses, etc. And this all creates heightened emotion, which is greater energy. And then, of course, there's the theory that now with a increased technological environment and AI and um, other technological capacities, that they can use that to also create great amounts of fear and division and polarity. They are creating a lot of polarity through propaganda, through the mainstream news, through fake news, fake truths, and creating this environment of confusion, uh, social division and polarity, um, and all this political upheaval, financial upheaval, the disruption of people's social lives, all this, etc., creates this energy of Loosh. And and so Robert Monroe, when he was told this story, apparently, from what I heard, it was maybe it's a rumor, but apparently he went into a depression, a deep depression that lasted several weeks, because he was told that the reason for life on the planet was just to create energy for these other entities. Um, but on the other side of that, he also learned that if we learn to control and manage our own energies, we can use it to our advantage. If you know that something you produce has a demand for someone else or something else, or has a demand um, reason, then of course you can learn to control yourself, that supply and demand. So um, perhaps we could say this is why uh, certain sacred wisdom traditions have been trying to train people to control their emotions, to recognize them externally, so you can see when you're moving into certain emotional states. Also, these traditions teach us how to be aware of our the mechanisms of conditioning, how we are socially and culturally conditioned, how our personalities are formed and impacted, so we can detach from those impacts and be aware of them, so we don't react to them uh, unawares or unconsciously. We respond to them consciously, and therefore we respond in a way where we manage our energetic response. We just do not react automatically and give away our energies. So, um, and you could say that perhaps the reason why we see more people speaking about Loosh today is because some people are believing that it's more self-evident, that we can see that humanity is being triggered and activated and pushed around to create more unbalanced states of heightened emotional energy. So it's perhaps a topic which has become a much more relevant. So that's in a nutshell, that's the explanation of what Loosh means in the terms given to Robert Monroe. Now, when I first read that, my reaction was, that's very interesting. But of course, I've got no way to verify if that's real or has any validity or not, because I have not had a conscious OBE. Um, and only those people perhaps who've had the same experience can validate it. So you have to look at that idea and then see, does it correspond to events in life? So um, when I came across that idea in 2007, which is, of course, what, 17 years ago now, I couldn't, I, it was an interesting idea, but can you work with it? Is it practical for yourself? Um, well, the thing is, um, take it as a hypothetical experiment. Um, because obviously, if it's not true and it's just some fantasy or some deluded experiences of some guy who was out of his body, um, then that's fine. Yeah, it's just an interesting idea that you come across in your reading explorations. But if it has some truth to it, then you could say, well, I don't know the extreme truth of this. Does it have some truth, a lot of truth, all truth? But if this theory or hypothesis at least allows me to take care of my emotional states, to look at the impacts, the food I receive from outside, because we receive food in terms of not just physical, um, physical food, what we eat, but we receive food in terms of the impacts and influences that we encounter in life. Um, you know, the information we receive, how we respond to events. So you could say, well, I don't believe in Loosh, but if I can see the world around me is trying to activate me to respond in heightened emotion or in negativity or in fear, I can choose not to respond that way. I can choose to consciously manage my state of emotion, my state of mind, psychology, and state of body. And that would help me to navigate my way through this life better. So if you believe in Lush or not, I would say that at least there's an advantage for a person to at least take this idea and to recognize that it's an impulse to allow us to take more conscious awareness of how we receive information and how we respond to life emotionally, psychologically. So in that way, we can't lose. Whether you believe in lose or not, you can't lose, can you? If you take it on board and become more self-aware and self-observant. So that's my few thoughts on lose. Well, as always, stay well, stay healthy, and above all, stay grounded. Cheers.